Welcome to the Productivity Podcast. He's back again, I think
Yes.
fourth appearance now on the podcast. Simon Fraser, current job title, VP of Customer Experience Strategy at InMoment. Hi Simon, welcome back.
Thanks for having me back. I feel like I'm a friend of the show now.
Some might say. Some might say. Anyway, so it's been a while since we last chatted about customer experience, and clearly lots happened in the world since then. Global pandemic, war, rising inflation, all those other things that are kind of going on behind the scenes, and we'll touch on some of those today. But first, kind of give us an update from what you're seeing from your wide range of clients in terms of trends that are coming through post-lockdown. Clearly, lockdown was a difficult time and we behaved differently. Is that continued? Is it changing? What kind of things are you seeing?
Yeah, I think we're seeing a return to what was going on pre-pandemic. The consumer behaviour has kind of adapted back to the pre-COVID times. But we've got a new normal, and the sort of the thought was, well, we'll get through COVID and then the world will be fine. Well, it's obviously not, and you've mentioned, we've got Ukraine, we've got cost of living, we've got inflation. So the topic has turned very much from how do we get through the pandemic to actually now we've got the repercussions and new stuff happening post-pandemic that brands are having to think about. And that's from both a customer perspective, but also from an employee perspective as well. We all know how the two things are very intertwined. So how well employees are being looked after, it has an impact, as well as how well customers are feeling looked after. I would say that the priorities for customers have changed. If we think during the pandemic phase that there was obviously you having to draw customers out away from digital into physical locations, and what was on their minds then was around sort of reassurance, certainly hygiene, social distancing. I think there's been a switch now to actually people wanting experiences. If they're going out, then actually don't so much worry about those factors, worry about delivering against your promises, delivering against the reason why I've entered your shop, your restaurant, your bank, and give us that sort of that product element has become to the fore now in comparison to perhaps during the pandemic when it was a case of just getting through it.
And you talked in there about kind of employees. So are you seeing more feedback in some of the data that you gather around employees, or is it still focused on some of those kind of hygiene factors you talk around?
Yeah, I think first of all, there's a recognition that we're seeing the voice of the employee and tapping into the mood of the employee has gained in importance. So we're seeing a lot more programs which are combining EX, so employee experience, with CX, with customer experience, and trying to get the sort of the full picture there and learn from employees.
And is that because we now don't see them on a day-to-day basis? So, I mean, we were talking before you went to the office yesterday, once a week, maybe now twice a week, and then client meetings. So, certainly let's think about retail and hospitality. You probably have to go to the environment every day because it's a shop or it's a hotel. But other organisations now are much more disconnected.
Dispersed.
Yeah.
That's a really good point. I hadn't thought of that, but I think that making sure that you're demonstrating that you value your employees, that you value their expertise, and if you're not getting in front of them as much as you were previously, ensuring that there is that continuous pulse of feedback, both in and out. That absolutely makes sense as a driving force for that need for connection, but also, I guess the environment, we're talking about the Great Resignation or the Great Reshuffle, however we'd like to describe it. I think that has probably spooked employers quite a bit. We're seeing in the market, massive shifts of employees in and out of businesses. And in some industries, it's actually quite hard to recruit and retain as well. So demonstrating that you value your employees, not just through higher wages or other perks, are you listening to them, and are you transforming their feedback into actual action that they can see and also customers can recognize as well.
It comes back to some of the stuff we've talked about before with James Boll from Purpose around getting back to your values and purpose and living and breathing them, or realigning them based on whatever the future holds. And we've talked about the new normal before, and I'm not sure there is one. It just keeps evolving and evolving. It's just not normal, or just
it's
different.
not the normal we have.
No, and it never will be probably moving forward. And I think change is always afoot, isn't it? But it comes back to aligning that, I think, doesn't it? So there's only so much you can do in terms of pay rise, and we've seen lots of the grocers go above certainly national living wage. Lots of people eradicate the 25 boundary and pay everybody the same hourly wage, but you can't keep doing that sustainably.
And even then, though, the wage growth isn't keeping up with the cost of goods as well. So yes, there's been certainly investment in employee wages, and we would have read in the last couple of weeks around the co-op putting quite a lot of the blame as to their drop in profits. I think it was 57% drop in their profitability, partly down to supply chain, partly for the fact that they're having to pay their shop colleagues more, but back of store, warehouses, supply chain, all of those are increasing and having that impact on profit as well. So you're right, it can't be sustained forever, but the gap widening again to prices is going to be a problem.
So we're thinking about colleagues more, which is good in employees and helping them feel like they're valued. As you say, part of that is driven selfishly by the kind of great resignation as well. I think of retention rather than churn, because we bring someone in, they don't stay, they go somewhere else for more pay, costs a lot of money. Some of that's invisible, but you've got the training cost, the uniform cost, the disruption cost to where they work, then the disruption when they've gone and trying to backfill. Are you seeing any different behaviour from customers that's getting recognised? So are we all going out and still being nice and considerate, and in that kind of mantra of when we all clap the NHS and all the services, or have we just gone out and thought, right, all bets are off, let's do what we want?
Yeah, we are seeing in the feedback that we collect and also the feedback that we ingest that there is a shift towards a lot of customer feedback on other customers. So this comes down to the fact that we've had this disruption. Some of how we, have behaved, and we've all been locked in our houses, we've perhaps forgotten what it is to be considerate to others, to other customers, and to employ, colleagues as well. I think there was a spate of posters on social media. I think Greggs was one of them. Dunkin' Donuts was another, with posters saying, please be considerate towards our teams. They've turned up for work. Yep. There's no excuse for poor behavior towards them. If I think in leisure industries, thinking around entertainment such as cinemas, that there is feedback from customers around the fact that other guests at those cinemas are not being considerate. That we've been stuck at homes looking at our screens, looking at our phones at the same time, and we can't break that habit when we're now going along to cinema screens, or we are disrupting the enjoyment of others. So this causes, again, businesses and brands some challenges around having to intervene, certainly having to sort of reinforce and re-educate what the expectations from to customers is when they're entering their premises. I don't think that was such a big topic. I know there's always been.
Yeah. There's always the 0.1%.
Yeah, but it just seems to be a swell of that in comparison to the pre-COVID times. Yeah.
And some of that must be linked to current vacancy rates, sickness rates, based on the fact that everybody's swapping chairs in some of those organisations. So that there's almost we're doing the best we can as a business with what we've got. We know it's not enough in terms of people. Therefore, you might have to queue longer for your pasty. You might have to queue longer for your cinema ticket, or the auditorium might take longer to clean or not be as clean.
And you've explained that in a very considered way. Unfortunately, we're quite emotional. Yeah. If we think about the Easter holidays that we're in at the moment, the airlines, airports, the media attention around the fact that they're perhaps not being quite ready for the fact that a new normal has appeared. We're all desperate to leave the country. Do you think that lots of those airlines and airports have furloughed people or made people redundant, it actually takes, back to your point around training, you can't just suddenly become someone who can operate in that environment. Yeah. You need to be trained. You need to go through security, think about airlines and airports as well. So it's going to take a little while, hopefully by the summer when I do leave the country,
yeah, me too.
This will all be sorted. I mean, it'll be a great experience, but I don't know whether we are patient with the experiences that we're having in that environment in the way that perhaps we were during COVID when we're all in it together. I think we've lost a little bit of that.
Yeah, and if you think back to pre-COVID, you'd walk into your local supermarket, your big one, they'd have a bank of 20 checkouts, self-service, self-scan tills. There'd be, 10 people on the checkout, maybe there's 25, and you get impatient. The fact that they've got all these checkouts, but no one to man it. During COVID, it was all fine because, these people are working in an environment where they're at risk and we're only allowed out. So it was a different trip because it's the only place you could go. I think we're probably back to that place of why have you only got 10 people on when you've got 25 checkouts? I think a lot in that example, a lot of people will take out the other 15 checkouts in the future.
Yeah.
And then my experience is, you're doing all you can because you've only got 10 checkouts.
Yes, I've always been fascinated by that ratio, that if you have a load of checkouts that are not operated, that is much worse than having fewer which are filled. That's the way that we think.
But you just look at it, Aldi and Lidl, though, less checkouts, always busy. Like my last trip to Aldi, they were queuing right back down the aisles. It was almost difficult to shop, but every one of their 6 checkouts was manned. So it's almost, what else can you do? Well, yes, you could put self-checkout in. It's not their model particularly, although I think they're kind of coming around and looking at that. But I was much more forgiving than when I went in the big supermarket and there were queues and there were lots more checkouts unmanned. So for me, it's a perception thing, and maybe we flip back to that. Maybe we've not.
But on that Aldi point around their checkout model, certainly we've seen that actually when they can recognise that a customer is in need, they will start to help pack again. So it's not a case of everything going back into trolleys. So even they are having to adapt and consider the personal needs of the customer in front of them. So they're almost breaking away from that model and making it a more personalised or subjective experience than they would have done before. But perhaps that might be as a result of COVID that they're looking at that again. Okay.
And I think they use a slightly different model. They've got some technology which tells them when to open and close tills based on people coming through the door and people in the store. It kind of, the computer says open till 3, open till 4, close till 3, close till 4. So I'm sure anybody that's shopped there, you've had that experience where you've been stood there and think, why are they closing that till and opening that one? So that there's some magic that happens with technology to tell them when to open tills and when to close tills.
Yeah, because actually the timing of doing that so it's visible to the customer is important. Again, we've done studies in the past that with retailers that actually the sight of a long queue will mean that customers will abandon.
Yeah, and so that's exactly what I did on my last trip, because I had one thing and I thought, you know what, it's not worth it. Now, my bigger challenge then was, how'd you get out? Because they barrier off all the checkouts with the trolley. And talking of frustration points, that I then had to put a pound in again because they put the pounds on, and
so they brought that back.
I'm not like the Queen by any stretch, but since lockdown, I very rarely carry cash because everything's just card. It feels quicker, easier, less contact with stuff. So turning up and finding out I had to then go back to the car and find a pound. And there was about 3 people that I saw do it at the same point. I was thinking, how many of us 3 are just going to get in the car and drive off before? So the biggest frustration was before we'd even got in the shop.
As for Christmas, Simon, I'll buy you one of those little plastic tokens that you can put into the trolley. So
you used to be able to spend those in. Used to be able to use those as pounds in machines, Anyway, we digress. So clearly, as part of COVID, there were lots of routines that were broken.
Yeah.
So people stopped gathering customer experience data, maybe gathered it differently. Again,
well, certainly a huge increase in interest and looking at digital as an experience, clearly, as that happened during COVID.
And are people kind of back on board now and settled back into routine with capturing that data, doing something with it? Are people looking at different options? I know kind of we've talked about this video embedded workflow, which might be interesting for people to hear about.
Well, yeah, so a recent experience, my son recently turned 13 and...
Has he come out of his bedroom since, or is he like...
Well, no, unfortunately, what I bought him has meant that it's even less likely that he leaves his bedroom now, which is... I went online and I wanted to buy a computer screen, a gaming screen. But obviously, being a good parent, I'm like, well, it's also got to work well for his homework and things like that. But we know what he's mainly using it for. And being busy, when I went online, it was out of retail hours. It was about 8 p.m. And Currys PC World are now offering this virtual assistant that you can click on a tab, and it basically dials up one of their colleagues. Now, sometimes that colleague might be installed, but I guess given the fact it was out of hours, I had a colleague step in and offer me advice. I thought it was an amazing service, but there's a couple of clunky elements of it. So imagine you go into a store and you're offered advice, you'd probably then go and buy that product.
Yeah.
But our online behavior is, okay, you've offered the advice, and they actually put the product into the basket. And I was like, yeah, but I want to read the reviews. I want to
see if I can get it cheaper somewhere else.
I made a promise that I wouldn't do that. So I said, well, actually, can you leave it in there? I need to step away. I need to look at it myself, probably have a conversation with my wife about it. And she said, that's fine. But when you dial back, can you ask for me?
No, is this a commission-based thing, is it?
I'm assuming so. So I took about, 10 minutes, read the reviews. Yeah, this is definitely the one that I want. So I dialed back. And this time, the previous colleague's video didn't come on. This time, the colleague's video came on. And it's a bit disconcerting. It's a bit voyeuristic that you can see them, but they can't see you. So okay. I don't know whether in time they'll make that more of a two-way thing. I can also understand why that might not be advisable.
Yeah.
So we waited 5 minutes whilst he tried to locate this other colleague, and he was pinging her and she didn't join the call. So he then had to take on the transaction and he had to start it from scratch again. So, no doubt he got the commission or whatever it was. And job done. I think it's a good experience. I can see why it is something that will become more ingrained. He said, if I'd phoned up at 3 a.m, someone would have picked up and spoken to me. So it's a 24/7 selling opportunity with advice for high ticket items. I think that's really good. I can imagine if you've got a pool of colleagues waiting for calls at a fairly nascent period for this sort of virtual assistant, I can imagine that's probably not the most efficient and effective use of colleagues' time at the moment. I imagine it's a little bit costly, but I think if it becomes ingrained, becomes more well-known, I could see that taking off.
It brings up a few points, really, I think, and some of this comes back to the whole Uber Eats, Just Eat, Deliveroo culture of, do we really need things accessible 24/7?
And none of those are profitable.
No, exactly. And that comes back to the point here. So at 3 o'clock in the morning, I wake up and decide I need a new computer monitor. Well, Currys PC World, in this example, must be paying an hourly rate because otherwise they'd be below minimum wage, and clearly paying a commission or some incentive for those people to sell, because I suspect there's a higher conversion once you put it in the basket and had a conversation with somebody. It's kind of there, I've done the hard work.
You feel a little bit guilty.
Yeah, just put
actually, can you stop that?
Yeah, just put your card details in and we're done.
Yeah.
So I think there's a bit of that. But do I really need anything that desperately at 3 o'clock in the morning? And it's back to some of the brands. I know we talked about kind of Aldi doing some stuff during lockdown with, was that Deliveroo?
Deliveroo, yeah, which they've since ended. Yeah.
Boots are starting to play with that kind of stuff. But I get back to the point, I don't know, maybe I'm getting old and I would say I've got grey hair, Fradney, but I don't know if I need anything that desperately that I want somebody to deliver it. And some of the stuff, can't be in a good state when it arrives, and I might be doing it a massive disservice because it might not be particularly warm when it started the journey, so it's got to get to me and. But I know there's a generation of people that live and die by it. I'd rather get in the car, go get it, do it, or think I'll get it on my next trip.
Yeah, so the car piece is interesting because I was talking to some American colleagues around this exact scenario, and they said that it just wouldn't work in the States because people like getting in their cars, they like driving, and they like going to these big out-of-town shopping
and
places.
I suppose distance is tricky as well. You're not going to get on your bike in America and ride down the freeway, are you? It's the whole setup's different.
Yeah, the whole setup's different. I do wonder whether something that being old enough to remember the last recession by quite some considerable time, that economic conditions do impact customer behavior. And I'll give you the example of the fact that 2008 through to 2010, the big out-of-town grocers were the ones that did really well.
Yeah.
And there was a number of different factors for that. You could get everything under one roof. You could do it in one trip. You could probably, which will be important at the moment, get much cheaper fuel in the supermarket forecourts. Now, I wonder whether we're not quite in a fuel crisis at the moment, but I think decisions will be made on how best to use that fuel, which could therefore see an increase in these sort of digital hybrid solutions. There is also the fact that I think businesses have recognized the fact they don't need to have everyone in a specific place. So if you could have some colleagues who are covering the whole nation rather than be in the local Currys PC World store, then that's probably a good thing. So I think this will take off in the UK for a number of different reasons.
Yeah, and I think we'll get back to the supermarkets are all savvy, aren't they? So they'll get back to offering coupons. You know, if you spend over £100 on food, you get 5p off a litre of fuel. We'll get back to some of those discounts because clearly, why wouldn't you? And drives advocacy, drives footfall, drives repeat spend, and I'll just fill up while I'm here. So you kind of get that halo effect of everything. Yeah, it'd be interesting to see how that takes off. I can see a time and place for it. I'd still can't quite get my head around 24/7 for some organisations.
Yeah.
But if they can make it paid, make it work, make sure the colleagues are paid correctly. The truth's all in the sales, isn't it? Mm-hmm. At some point, someone will look at it and say, we do nothing between these times, turn it off between then, or actually this is all amazing and we're doing really well. Who'd have thought?
Yeah, I probably sit in a segment of shoppers who don't shop a lot and typically leave it to the very last minute for birthdays.
Yeah. See that peak at fragrance on Christmas Eve. And you have got a bunch of people, I suppose we need to recognise that are night workers that will need that. You know, you've got people that are working when we're asleep and all that kind of stuff. So there will be a segment of it. It's whether, I suppose, somebody takes that market and consolidates it, or it's all just company by company that make those decisions. But time will tell. The tech sounds interesting.
Yep.
So
as I say, I think if you go on the website of the company who's running or providing that tech, they work with some very well-known brands. I'm sure there are other suppliers out there as well, but we'll see.
And any other things on your mind in terms of where the future's heading? So we've got this video-enabled workflow. Any other bits that you think are going to start to come through, or you thought did and got held up by the pandemic and are now starting to surface again?
So I think there's a number. If I think of the conversations that we're having, there are topics and solutions that kind of came into their own during the pandemic that now other companies are looking at. So I talk about buy now, pay later. I mean, it's fascinating, at least to me, that, buy now, pay later came as a solution to solve for the fact that many consumers go online and buy more stuff than they're actually going to keep.
Yeah.
So to, withhold being impacted on your credit cards by all these products, you can do this deferred payment. So hopefully by the time you've got your refund back, you've never actually paid any of those deferred payments. In the news, you can see that Next, M&S, John Lewis, all looking at deferred payment schemes.
Well, is it Klarna's one of the big ones you see on the
Which
site?
is I think is the fastest growing or the highest value technology solution in the whole of Europe now, Klarna. And they're entering into retail banking. And then you've got likes of Monzo who are then entering into their world as well. So
I suppose the risk is in a world where costs are going up that you get back to, if more interest rates go up, cost of living goes up, people rely on these more, and actually, do you get more people defaulting?
There's a huge issue with the fact that a lot of users of Klarna, etc., don't still recognise the fact that this is credit.
Yeah, it's not free money, right?
Yeah, so that's one that I'd call out. I think thinking about the role of the high street, thinking about retail and ensuring that it is as delightful and surprising an experience as possible. Recently walked through from the shopping centre through to the high street, through a store and a fashion store, and it just had zero ambience. It just, there was very little going on. That I was actually questioning as I was walking through, why would I rather do this than go online and purchase? And I think in retail, I'm not saying everything has to be like Harry Potter when you go into a store, but boring retail is going to continue to be, an issue unless that gets fixed. So they've got to think about the experience again and thinking about emotions.
It gets flushed.
Not just about,
It gets flushed out there, doesn't it? So Debenhams are on the high street, House of Fraser are diminishing their number of stores. We've seen places like, I think TM Lewin are in their third round of administration. So you can't escape by just refinancing, selling. You've got to wake up, change the proposition, understand why you're relevant, why you aren't relevant, maybe what channels are your strengths. Maybe it's, TM Lewin need to be in John Lewis. Maybe that's their channel. Maybe they need to be a virtual company, not a bricks and mortar. So you've got to find your spot, but being in trouble 3 or 4 times. I think there's something in the news as we talked today around Ted Baker again. And I think they've been on the cusp of things a number of times. And, they're, for some people, the go-to brand, but for other people, not relevant. So, it's...
You've mentioned there, Marketplace. I mean, Asda is famous for this at the moment, for having multiple brands all under one roof. Probably one of the most interesting crossovers is the Primark Greggs. Yeah,
still can't.
Crossover.
I can understand... I can understand where it works one way. I'm not quite sure I want a Greggs hoodie. And I was a bit disappointed the last time I went into Greggs that they weren't wearing the Primark clothes. I thought that was an obvious crossover to sell it. But then you look online on social and, the trainers that Primark did, the Greggs ones, were some hot sought after collectors thing. So who am I to do it a disservice?
Yeah, no, so I think, and having, is it like Asda, I think, sell Boohoo. So having online only in your store is an interesting move, but it's also the other way around. I think we've seen in Tottenham Primark again that with their website, the plans are, from what we hear, that you'll be able to go on and check the inventory. Is that item, it might be a licensed bit of clothing from Disney. Is that in my local Primark store? And having that open inventory is something that I know we've talked about previously.
It's a big challenge with that.
It is a big challenge, but Primark are leaning into that, and obviously not considering e-commerce as of yet, but they are bringing in digital and making that more of a connected CX experience. Back to if you're thinking from a retail perspective, what typically delights customers beyond the product is people, but they're always going to be the first under the lens in a cost of living moment like we're in at the moment. So, make sure that you're not denigrating the experience you deliver by constantly cutting back on the amount of shop floor colleagues that you've got on available for customers.
Yeah, and it comes back to some of the work we're doing with certain retailers at the moment of what can you automate, even being bolder than that, what can you stop doing? And there will be a point, I think, when certainly those retailers that get it will be turning off the lights and the robots will come to town. There'll be a robot vacuuming the floor. There'll be a robot mopping the floor. There'll be a robot going around the store checking for gaps that maybe fills them, maybe doesn't, but we'll know where all the products are in the back stock for the morning. So the world's going to change. I saw an interesting collaboration. It may have been Primark again, may not. They're doing, I think it was Netflix clothing or Spotify clothing, or it was one or the other. So again, not sure I need a
tapping into the zeitgeist there. But on the robots bit, obviously robots are very unlikely to resign, although you probably would have seen the story of the Travelodge robot Hoover who made an escape from a hotel and was found hidden, hiding itself under a hedge. So maybe the robots are becoming intelligent.
I was going to say we're into Terminator world now. So we'll pause on that note. I think thanks for coming back. Good to reflect, because certainly a lot's happened since we last spoke, and I'm sure we'll catch up again soon.
Hope so. Thanks, Simon.